I only agreed to fly from Denver to Santa Fe because my director promised I wouldn't have to speak at the conference. I expected 45 quiet minutes in the air, 2 days of archive meetings, and a hotel room where no one knew my name. I didn't expect a canceled flight to put me in a rental car with Rafael Torres. The cancellation announcement came 20 minutes before boarding. I was sitting near the gate with my laptop open and a paper cup of coffee cooling beside me when the screen above the desk changed from delayed to canceled. For several seconds, no one reacted, then half. The passengers stood at once. The gate agent raised both hands as people crowded toward her. Ladies and gentlemen, due to severe winds and operational restrictions, this flight has been canceled. We are working to rebook everyone, but the next available direct service may not be until tomorrow evening. A low wave of frustration moved through the gate. I stayed seated. Not because I was calm, because when too many things went wrong at once, my mind became extremely still. The conference registration opened at 8 the next morning. I was carrying presentation materials for a regional archives meeting, including digitized records from the museum where I worked. Nothing in my bag was irreplaceable, but my director had spent 3 weeks reminding me that our institution's reputation depended on the presentation being ready. I worked as an archivist for the Western Heritage Museum in Denver. Most people pictured me carefully unfolding Civil War letters while wearing white gloves. In reality, I spent a large part of my life renaming scanned documents, answering research requests, and explaining that a photograph labeled possibly 1930s could not magically become more precise because someone had an important deadline. I was 27, good at my job, and deeply attached to schedules. The gate agent announced that the airline could place passengers on standby for a connecting flight through Phoenix. The following afternoon, that would get me to Santa Fe approximately 7 hours after the first conference session ended. I closed my laptop. A man standing near the charging station spoke into his phone. "No, I'm not waiting until tomorrow night. I have to be there by noon." His voice wasn't loud, but there was enough controlled urgency in it to reach me. He was around 30, with dark curly hair, warm brown skin, and a navy jacket over a soft gray shirt. He had one hand pressed against his hip and the other holding his phone. A leather overnight bag sat near his shoes. "I'll figure something out," he continued. "Tell Elena not to cancel the tasting." He listened for a moment. "No, I'm not driving through a blizzard. There isn't a blizzard." Outside the windows, heavy clouds moved across the runway. The wind was strong enough to bend the rain sideways, but the road south remained open. The man ended the call and looked toward the gate information screen. For a moment, our eyes met. He gave me a brief expression that seemed to say, "This is terrible." I responded with a slight nod that probably said, "I already knew travel was a mistake." Then we both looked away. I checked the distance from Denver International Airport to Santa Fe, 590 kilometers. A little under 6 hours if traffic cooperated. Driving was possible. It was also expensive, inconvenient, and not part of the plan. I opened 3 rental car websites. The first had no vehicles available. The second offered a luxury SUV for a price that made me briefly consider abandoning my career. The third showed one remaining compact crossover at the airport location. I reserved it before I had time to question myself. The confirmation email arrived. I packed my laptop and headed toward ground transportation. By the time I reached the rental counter, a line had already formed. The canceled flight had apparently given everyone the same idea. The man from the gate stood 2 people ahead of me. He was speaking to an employee behind the desk. "There's nothing," he asked. "Not for one-way rental to Santa Fe," the employee said. "We're completely sold out." "What about Albuquerque?" "Nothing until tomorrow." He looked toward the row of car company signs, as if another vehicle might appear through determination. The employee noticed me waiting. "Next." The man moved aside. I approached the desk and gave her my confirmation number. She typed it into the computer. "You reserved the last vehicle in that class." I felt the man beside me turn slightly. The employee continued. "Are you returning it in Santa Fe?" "Yes." "There's a one-way fee." "I saw that." "And because of demand, the rate has changed since the initial estimate." Of course it had. She showed me the total. I tried not to react visibly. The man from the gate looked at the screen. I'm sorry, he said. Are you going to Santa Fe? I turned toward him. He lifted one hand. I know this is strange. I'm Rafael. I was on your flight. I remember. That sounded worse than I intended. No, it didn't. He glanced at the employee, then back at me. I need to get to Santa Fe for a work meeting tomorrow. If you're driving, I could split the rental and gas. My first answer formed immediately. No, not because Rafael seemed dangerous. He seemed frustrated and tired, but not threatening. The problem was that I didn't know him. I didn't know how he drove, whether he talked constantly, whether he believed speed limits were suggestions, or whether agreeing to spend 6 hours in a car with a stranger was the beginning of a cautionary documentary. Raphael appeared to read at least part of that on my face. You should absolutely be suspicious, he said. That isn't usually how people make themselves less suspicious. Fair point. He pulled out his wallet and placed his driver's license on the counter between us. Take a picture of this. Send it to whoever you want. I can also give you my employer's information, my social media, and the number of the person waiting for me in Santa Fe. The rental employee looked between us with mild interest. Raphael continued, we can share our live locations with someone. We can agree on stops before leaving. You can keep the rental agreement in your name, and if at any point you're uncomfortable, you can leave me somewhere public. That last part sounds slightly threatening to you. I'm comfortable taking that risk. I looked at his license. Rafael Mateo Torres, age 30, Denver address. The photograph looked exactly like him, only less tired. What kind of work meeting? I asked. I'm a chef. I'm cooking a tasting for 2 potential investors tomorrow afternoon. Why are they making you travel during a wind advisory? They're not. I made the mistake of assuming an airplane would work. I understood that kind of mistake. The employee cleared her throat. I do need to finish the rental. I looked at the total again, then at Raphael. My name is Jonah, I said. He nodded. Nice to meet you. I'm sending your information to my sister. Good. And my director. Also good. If you drive, you follow the speed limit. I'm a chef, not a criminal. That isn't a guarantee. No, but I have excellent insurance. I took a picture of his license. Half the rental, I said. Half the gas. Deal. And we stop whenever either person needs to. Agreed. The employee slid the paperwork toward me. Would you like to add him as an authorized driver? I looked at Raphael. He raised both hands. Your decision. Yes, I told her. Add him. 40 minutes later, we stood in the parking garage beside a dark gray crossover that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and artificial pine. Raphael placed his bag in the back. I should warn you, he said. I have strong opinions about road trip music. That seems like information you should have disclosed before the contract. What do you listen to? Mostly podcasts. He closed the trunk slowly. That may be a problem. I can leave you at the terminal. You agreed to public. The terminal is public. He smiled. It was the first time I noticed the small crease that appeared beside his left eye. I put my laptop bag behind the passenger seat and photographed the vehicle for the rental record. Raphael watched me walk around the car. You're thorough, he said. I don't enjoy being blamed for damage caused by previous strangers. Is that a general philosophy or only for rental cars? Get in. We both sent our live locations to people we trusted. I sent Raphael's license photograph to my sister, Claire, along with the message. Flight canceled. Driving to Santa Fe with another passenger. His information is attached. Call me in 1 hour. Her response arrived immediately. Are you being kidnapped? Not currently. That is not reassuring. Raphael's phone rang while we were still in the garage. He answered through the car speakers. A woman's voice filled the vehicle. Are you inside the stranger's car? Yes, Elena. Does the stranger have a name? Jonah. Jonah, can you hear me? I looked at Raphael. He seemed embarrassed. Yes. Please don't murder my chef. I wasn't planning to. Good, Raphael. Send me a photograph of the license plate. I already did. And check in when you reach Colorado Springs. Yes. Jonah, he forgets to eat when he's stressed. I don't think that's my responsibility. It isn't. I just want someone else to know. I'm hanging up. The call ended. Rafael leaned his head against the seat. She manages the restaurant. She seems efficient. She terrifies suppliers. I like her. You've known her for 12 seconds. I gather information quickly. We left the parking garage at 4:14 in the afternoon. The highway south was wet but clear. Dark clouds stretched over the plains, and the mountains appeared and disappeared behind the rain. For the first 20 minutes, we spoke only when necessary. Raphael adjusted the temperature. I checked the navigation. He asked whether I preferred silence. I said I didn't mind conversation. Neither of us started one. It was strange how quickly 6 hours could feel like a physical object between two people. Raphael finally pointed toward my bag. What kind of conference are you attending? Regional archives and public history. That sounds important. It's mostly people arguing about database systems. I take it back. I work at the Western Heritage Museum, the one near Civic Center. Yes, I've been there. That surprised me recently. Last winter, my niece had a school project on migration routes. You went with her? My sister was working. What did you think? Raphael considered the question seriously. The mining exhibit was better than I expected. That sounds almost insulting. The lighting in the agricultural section was terrible. I glanced at him. He smiled. I told you I'd been there. The lighting is terrible. We've been trying to get funding to replace it. Your gift shop also sells 3 different kinds of fake gold. That's our most historically accurate display. He laughed. The sound changed the atmosphere inside the car. What do you do at the museum? He asked. I manage part of the photographic and oral history collection. Cataloging, digitization, research access. So people bring you old boxes and expect you to explain their families. Constantly. Can you? Usually they want me to confirm that their great-grandfather was secretly famous. Was he? Almost never. Raphael looked out at the rain. My grandmother had boxes of photographs with no names written on them. She knew everyone, so she assumed everyone else would too. That happens a lot. After she died, my mother kept asking relatives to identify people. Half of them disagreed. Memory changes. That must make your work difficult. It makes it interesting. I rarely describe my job as interesting to strangers. Most conversations ended after I said, archivist. Raphael asked what happened to photographs no one could identify. I explained that context could sometimes be reconstructed through clothing, locations, photographer's marks, or other images in the same collection. So you're a detective, he said. A very slow detective. That still counts. What kind of chef are you? The underpaid kind. More specifically, I'm the executive sous chef at a restaurant called Juniper. I know it. You've eaten there? No. I've read the menu and decided I wasn't dressed correctly. Raphael turned toward me. It's a neighborhood restaurant. The menu uses the phrase fermented chili emulsion. That doesn't require formal clothing. It creates expectations. You can wear that exact jacket. I looked down at my dark raincoat. This is a museum jacket. What does that mean? It has interior pockets. That's useful in restaurants too. Raphael had worked at Juniper for 4 years. The restaurant served food inspired by northern New Mexico and Colorado, though he was quick to say they avoided calling it fusion. Fusion usually means someone refused to make a decision, he said. Do chefs always have this many rules? Only insecure chefs and confident chefs. We pretend our opinions are principles. The rain weakened as we approached the southern edge of Denver. Raphael took control of the music after I admitted my podcast queue included a 3-part series on municipal record retention. He played old soul, Latin rock, and a singer-songwriter whose name I forgot immediately. None of it was loud. Every few songs he asked if I minded. I didn't. Near Castle Rock, my sister called. Her face appeared on the car screen. I answered without video. Are you safe? Claire asked. Yes. Is he still there? Raphael raised his hand toward the dashboard. Still here. Claire was silent. Hello, he added. Hello, possible criminal. I gave him my license. That's exactly what an organized criminal would do. Rafael nodded. She's good. I'm putting your location on my tablet, Claire said. Call me when you stop. I will. And don't let him convince you to visit any secondary locations. We're driving to another state. That is technically a secondary location. After the call ended, Raphael said, Your sister seems protective. She watches too many crime documentaries. Does she always call you this often? Only when I make decisions she considers socially adventurous. You shared a car. For me, this is extreme. He looked at me with open curiosity. You don't like meeting new people? I like people after I've had time to confirm they're reasonable. How long does that take? Years. And I'm doing well. You haven't reached reasonable. Where am I? Provisionally tolerable. I'll take it. We stopped outside Colorado Springs for gas. The wind had pushed most of the clouds east, revealing a strip of clear evening sky above the mountains. The air smelled of wet pavement and gasoline. Raphael filled the tank while I went inside for coffee. I returned with 2 cups. You didn't ask how I take it, he said. Black. He looked surprised. You were drinking black coffee at the gate. You noticed. You were standing near the charging station. Raphael accepted the cup. Thank you. He took a sip, then looked toward the mountains. The last sunlight touched the snow along the peaks. That's unfairly beautiful, he said. I stood beside him near the pump. You live in Denver. I know. I still forget to look. His phone rang again. He checked the screen and stepped several feet away to answer. I didn't try to listen, but parts of the conversation reached me. Yes, noon tomorrow. A pause. No, I understand. Another pause. I'm still considering the offer. His voice changed slightly when he said it. More careful. I want to see the space first. He listened, looking toward the highway. I know what the investors expect. When he ended the call, he remained still for a moment. Everything all right? I asked. Yes. He placed the phone in his pocket. The tasting is still happening. And the offer. Raphael looked at me. You heard that. Only the word. He nodded toward the car. We should keep moving. I didn't ask again. By 7:30, the light had faded and we were south of Pueblo. The highway stretched ahead in long, dark sections. Raphael had taken over driving, and I was checking my conference emails when my stomach made a sound loud enough to interrupt the music. Raphael looked at me. I'm fine. You're making distressed animal noises. I had lunch. What time? 11. That was 8 hours ago. I was dealing with a flight. Elena warned you that I forget to eat, he said. She didn't warn me about you. I don't forget. I postpone. That's forgetting with office vocabulary. A roadside sign advertised a diner at the next exit. Raphael turned on the signal. We should keep going, I said. We need food. If we stop every hour, we'll reach Santa Fe at midnight. It's already going to be close to midnight. I can eat something in the car. I looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm not letting our first shared meal be a protein bar under fluorescent highway lights. Our first shared meal? Don't make it strange. You made it strange. I'm making a traffic decision. He exited the highway. The diner sat beside a truck stop beneath a red neon sign. Inside, booths lined the windows and a row of pies rotated slowly in a glass case. The hostess led us to a table near the back. Raphael opened the menu and frowned. What? I asked. Nothing. You're judging it. I'm reading. You're judging the font. The font is aggressive. I looked at the laminated menu. It's red. Exactly. A young server approached carrying water glasses. He couldn't have been older than 21. His name tag said Malcolm. Sorry for the wait, he said. We're short tonight. We've been here 30 seconds, Raphael replied. Malcolm exhaled with visible relief. He took our orders. Raphael asked for green chili stew. I ordered a turkey sandwich because it seemed difficult to misunderstand. When Malcolm turned away, a tray slipped from another server's hand near the kitchen entrance. Several glasses hit the floor. The sound made half the restaurant look up. Raphael stood before I realized what he was doing. He moved 2 chairs aside so no one stepped near the glass, then helped place napkins over the spilled water until an employee arrived with a broom. "You work here now?" I asked when he returned, occupational reflex. "You didn't touch the broken glass. I'm not completely reckless." Our food arrived quickly. Raphael tasted the stew, then took another bite. "Well?" I asked. "It's good." "You sound disappointed." I was prepared to be judgmental. "That must be difficult for you." "It's humbling." He pushed the bowl slightly toward me. "Try it." I ordered my own food. "You ordered the safest sandwich in Colorado." "It's reliable." "It's afraid of seasoning." I tasted the stew. It was warm, smoky, and much better than my sandwich. Raphael watched my expression. "Don't say anything." I didn't. "You were about to." "I was going to acknowledge that you were right." "Please do." I've reconsidered. We ate while trucks moved through the wet parking lot outside. The conversation became easier without either of us deciding it should. Raphael told me he had grown up in Aurora with his mother, older sister, and grandmother. His grandmother cooked for everyone on their street, whether they were hungry or not. She believed feeding someone gave her the right to ask personal questions. He said, "Did it?" "In her house, absolutely." What would she ask me? "How old are you? Why aren't you married? And whether your mother knows you skip meals." Efficient. "She would have liked you." The sentence landed with unexpected warmth. Raphael looked down at his bowl as if he hadn't meant it to sound significant. "What about your family?" he asked. "My parents live near Fort Collins. Claire lives in Boulder." "Are you close?" "With my sister." "And your parents?" "We're fine." That answer usually means something. My father thinks museums are hobbies funded by taxpayers. Raphael's expression tightened. "That's rude." "He isn't trying to be rude. He just respects jobs that produce measurable results." "You preserve history." "He can't hold that in his hand." "You can hold photographs." "He considers photographs sentimental." Raphael rested his spoon against the bowl. "Do you?" "No." "Good." There was something protective in his response that I didn't know what to do with. I looked out the window. "My last boyfriend agreed with him," I said. The words surprised both of us. Raphael didn't rush to ask a question. I continued because stopping would make the sentence feel larger. "Not exactly. He didn't dislike my job. He just treated it as temporary, something I would eventually leave when I found a more serious career." "How long were you together?" "Almost 3 years." "What happened?" "He moved to Seattle for work." "And you didn't want to go?" "He never asked me to." Raphael waited. "He said we'd manage long distance," I continued. Then every conversation about the future became something we would discuss later. I spent 10 months living as if my real life was about to begin somewhere else. That sounds painful. It was educational. Raphael gave me a look. "What?" That's a very archivist way to describe heartbreak. I learned things, such as temporary situations rarely stay temporary in the way people promise, and now you avoid them. I avoid pretending there's something else. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "That makes sense." He didn't tell me I was too cautious. He didn't say the right person would change everything. He simply accepted the shape of what I had told him. It made me want to tell him more. I didn't. When the bill arrived, Raphael reached for it. "We're splitting everything," I said. "I know. I was checking the total." "You were going to pay." "I was going to pay for the stew you stole." I took one bite, a generous bite. We divided the bill exactly. Outside, the air had turned colder. Raphael looked south toward the highway. "We're both tired." "I'm fine." "You've said that twice tonight." "It hasn't been true either time." "I can drive." "That isn't the same as being rested." I checked the navigation. 3 hours and 40 minutes remained. An accident had slowed traffic near Trinidad. The estimated arrival time had moved past midnight. "We could stop in Trinidad," Raphael said. "Continue early." "I need to register by 8. If we leave at 5:30, we'll arrive before 8. That gives us about 5 hours of sleep, more than driving exhausted gives us." He was right. I disliked that he was right. I'll check hotels, I said. The first three were full. The fourth had 2 rooms available at a small roadside motel near the northern edge of Trinidad. I booked them. Separate rooms, Rafael said. I looked at him. I know that was obvious, he continued. I just don't want you wondering whether I had some strange shared room plan. I wasn't. You looked like you were. I was calculating the cost. Right. The motel sign flickered above a low building arranged around a small parking lot. The office smelled like old carpet and cinnamon air freshener. The woman behind the counter handed us 2 keys. Rooms 14 and 15, she said. Coffee starts at 5. Rafael looked at me. Perfect. Nothing about 5 in the morning is perfect. We carried our bags along the outdoor walkway. At my door, Rafael stopped. 5:15, he asked. 5:30. We need to leave by 5:40. I'll be ready. He nodded. Good night, Jonah. Good night. I unlocked my door. Rafael? He turned. Thanks for suggesting we stop. A small smile appeared. You're welcome. The room was basic but clean. I showered, set 3 alarms, and lay down. I should have fallen asleep immediately. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind move around the building. My phone lit up. Rafael had sent a message. The vending machine has crackers from at least 2009. I replied, historically significant. I expected that to be the end of it. A minute later, I'm getting water. Do you need anything? No. Then, because the room felt too quiet. Actually, I'll come with you. The vending machine stood near the motel office under a bright exterior light. Rafael was already there, wearing the same jeans and a black sweater he had taken from his bag. He held 2 bottles of water. I thought you didn't need anything. I changed my mind. That seems healthy. Don't make it a moment. We sat on a wooden bench near the office. The parking lot was nearly empty. Beyond the motel, the dark outline of the mountains rose against the sky. Rafael opened one of the water bottles. I should explain the phone call, he said. You don't have to. I know. He rested his forearms on his knees. The investors in Santa Fe want me to open a restaurant with them. I looked at him. As the chef? As a partner, eventually. They have a building they're considering near the rail yard. That sounds significant. It is. But you don't sound excited. I am excited. He paused. I'm also not sure I trust the reasons I'm excited. What does that mean? Rafael looked across the parking lot. I've wanted my own place since I was 19. A small restaurant. Food I actually care about. A kitchen where people aren't treated like machinery. That sounds like a good reason. It is. But part of me also wants to prove I can do it because everyone expects me to stay in someone else's kitchen forever. Who expects that? Some chefs I've worked for, my mother sometimes, me on bad days. Would moving to Santa Fe prove them wrong? Maybe. Would opening the right restaurant prove them wrong? He turned toward me. That was annoyingly reasonable. I work with historical evidence. Rafael smiled slightly. The investors want an answer within a month, he said. If I say yes, I'll probably move before the end of summer. You live in Denver now? 20 minutes from the airport. I almost laughed. What? I live near City Park. That's 15 minutes from my restaurant. We had both traveled to the airport, boarded the same canceled flight, and agreed to drive nearly 6 hours with a stranger who lived a few neighborhoods away. That seems statistically irritating, I said. It's the most Denver thing that could have happened. He leaned back against the bench. You're thinking about the temporary part. I looked at him. At dinner, he continued, you said you avoid temporary situations. I said I avoid pretending. Right. I wasn't applying it to you. Not consciously. The words might have felt intrusive from someone else. From Rafael, they felt accurate. We met 8 hours ago, I said. I know. You may move to another state. I know that too. I'm not building a case. You're always building a case. I looked away. Rafael didn't move closer. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I just noticed you became more distant after I mentioned the offer. I didn't. You started checking your phone every 2 minutes. I had conference messages. Jonah. I let out a breath. This is exactly why I don't like unusual circumstances. What is? People say things because it's late and they're tired and they know the situation ends in the morning. Rafael considered that. Do you think I'm saying things I don't mean? I think people are more honest when there are no consequences, and that makes the honesty less real. Sometimes, the wind moved a dry leaf across the pavement. Rafael looked toward the mountains. I think people are often less honest when they expect to see someone again, he said. There's more to lose. I didn't answer. I'm not trying to turn this into something, he added. I like talking to you. That's all I know. The simplicity of it loosened something in my chest. I like talking to you too, I said. Raphael smiled. Provisionally. Don't ruin it. We sat outside for another 20 minutes. He told me about the first meal he remembered cooking alone. Scrambled eggs with so much cumin that his sister refused to enter the kitchen. I told him about accidentally deleting 400 catalog records during my first internship and restoring them before anyone noticed. Did you tell your supervisor? He asked. 3 years later, so you do hide crimes, administrative crimes. Claire was right. At 5:15 the next morning, Raphael knocked on my door holding coffee. You said 5:30. This is preparation time. I accepted the cup. How did you know my order? You take a little milk, no sugar. I stared at him. You changed your coffee at the diner. You noticed? That doesn't apply. It does now. The road south was nearly empty. Morning light appeared as we climbed toward Raton Pass. The clouds had cleared, leaving the mountains sharp against a pale blue sky. Raphael drove while I answered conference emails. At one point I realized I had been rereading the same message for several minutes. Raphael had one hand on the wheel. The other rested loosely near the center console. His profile looked softer in the early light. He caught me looking. Do I have something on my face? No. You're staring. I was thinking about my face, about the conference. Very convincing. I looked back at my laptop. Raphael didn't say anything else, but I saw his smile reflected faintly in the window. We crossed into New Mexico shortly after 6:30. The landscape widened around us. Dry hills replaced the darker Colorado mountains, and morning light turned the earth gold and red. Near a scenic overlook, Raphael slowed. We have 20 minutes, he said. We don't. The arrival time says 7:36. Registration begins at 8. Exactly. He pulled into the overlook before I could argue. Cold air met us when we stepped out. The highway curved through the valley below. Mountains stretched toward the horizon in layers of blue and brown. Raphael stood beside the railing. This is why flying is a mistake, he said. Flying takes 45 minutes. Flying also gets canceled. That isn't a permanent feature. Today it is. I stood beside him. Our shoulders were close but not touching. For a minute, neither of us spoke. The silence felt different from the silence at the beginning of the drive. It no longer needed to be filled. Raphael rested his hands on the railing. I'm glad you took the last car, he said. You would have found another way. Probably. You seem annoyingly resourceful. I would have joined a family road trip and become their favorite child. That seems likely. He turned his head toward me. I'm still glad it was you. There were many safe responses available. I could have made a joke. I could have mentioned the rental cost. Instead, I said, so am I. His expression changed slightly. Not surprise, recognition. For one suspended second, I thought he might step closer. A truck passed behind us, breaking the moment with a burst of road noise. Raphael looked back toward the car. We should go. Yes. Neither of us moved immediately. We reached Santa Fe at 7:38. The city appeared in low adobe buildings, narrow streets, and morning sunlight. The conference hotel stood a few blocks from the plaza. Raphael parked near the entrance. Hotel staff moved around us with luggage carts while conference attendees crossed the lobby wearing name badges. The journey was over. I had spent most of the previous evening calculating how quickly we could reach Santa Fe. Now I wanted another hour. Rafael got out and helped remove my bag from the trunk. "You don't need to do that," I said. "I know." He placed it beside me on the pavement. For several seconds, we stood facing each other. "I'll send you the final rental amount," I said. Very romantic. I wasn't trying to be romantic. That's the problem. I looked at him. He smiled, but there was nervousness beneath it. "Can I have your number?" he asked. "You already have it from the location sharing?" "I have a temporary link and your name in a group message with Elena." "That isn't enough?" I was hoping for something less administrative. I handed him my phone. He entered his number, then called himself. "There," he said. "Now you can ignore me properly." "I don't ignore people. You postpone." "That's different." Rafael gave me back the phone. "I'll be at the restaurant space most of the day," he said. "Then the tasting. I'll be trapped in conference sessions. Do archivists allow breaks?" "Under controlled conditions. If you're free later, I'd like to see you." I felt the familiar instinct to reduce the meaning of the invitation. We were both alone in a city away from home. We had spent the night traveling. Seeing each other again didn't have to mean anything. That was exactly the kind of thought I no longer trusted. "What time?" I asked. Raphael's smile returned. "I'll text you." He stepped back toward the car. "Good luck with your database arguments. Good luck with the fermented chili emulsion." That was one menu. I remember evidence. He got into the car and drove away. I watched until the crossover disappeared at the end of the street. The conference passed in a blur of presentations, name badges, and overheated meeting rooms. At 10:30, Raphael sent a photograph of an empty restaurant space with high windows, exposed brick, and dust across the floor. "Potential." I enlarged the image. "It was beautiful," I replied. "Needs labels 3 inches to the left." His answer came quickly. I knew I brought the right consultant. At 1, he sent a picture of 6 plates arranged on a stainless steel counter. At 3:15, "Investors like the food. They also like using the word scalable," I responded. A warning sign. Exactly. My final session ended at 6. I returned to my hotel room and placed my badge on the desk. There was no message from Rafael. At 6:30, I told myself he was working. At 7, I ordered room service soup and opened my conference notes. At 7:12, my phone rang. "Please tell me you haven't eaten," Rafael said. "I ordered soup." "Cancel it." "Why?" "The tasting ended, and I have enough leftover food to feed a city council. I don't think hotels let strangers bring industrial quantities of food into rooms." "I'm not coming to your room." There was a short pause. "I found a courtyard near the plaza," he continued. "Public, well lit, and completely approved by Elena." I smiled. "What time?" 20 minutes. The courtyard belonged to a small art center that remained open for an evening event. Raphael had bought 2 drinks from a nearby cafe and carried the leftover tasting food in neatly packed containers. We sat at an outdoor table beneath strings of lights. He unpacked roasted chicken with red chili sauce, grilled vegetables, blue corn cakes, and a dessert involving dark chocolate and toasted pumpkin seeds. "You made all of this today?" I asked. "With help." "It's unfair." "What is?" "That you can do this. You preserve history." That has never impressed anyone during dinner. It impressed me. The statement was so direct that I looked down at the food. Raphael told me the investors had offered him a formal partnership. "They want an answer in 3 weeks," he said. "What did you think of the space?" "I loved it." "Then why are you hesitating?" "Because loving a building isn't the same as wanting the life attached to it." I understood that better than I wanted to. We ate slowly. Afterward, we walked around the plaza. Shops had closed, but people still moved beneath the lights. Music drifted from a restaurant patio. Raphael walked close beside me. Our hands brushed once. Neither of us acknowledged it. At my hotel entrance, we stopped. Raphael was staying in Santa Fe for 2 more nights. I was returning to Denver the following afternoon with 2 museum colleagues who had offered me a ride. "This is probably the part where we say we'll get coffee sometime," he said. "You don't like coffee?" I don't like sentences people use instead of making plans. I looked at him. When are you free next week? He asked. In Denver? That is where we both live. Thursday evening. I work Thursday. Tuesday. I'm free Tuesday. The answer came too quickly to pretend this was casual. Tuesday, I said. I know a bookstore with a cafe. You're taking an archivist to a bookstore? I'm working with available evidence. He smiled. Good night, Jonah. Good night. For one moment, I thought we might hug. Neither of us moved. Then Rafael stepped backward, lifting one hand in a small wave before turning toward the plaza. I watched him leave. The first message arrived the next morning. Rafael had sent a photograph of a black coffee beside a bakery window, mandatory proof that mornings exist. I replied with a picture of my conference badge. This says otherwise. By the time I returned to Denver, messaging him had already become part of the day. He sent photographs from the Santa Fe market and complained about investors who used the phrase brand story without understanding either word. I sent pictures from the museum basement, including a box labeled miscellaneous Western objects. That is the problem. Open it. Absolutely not. Coward, Tuesday arrived slowly. I reached the bookstore 10 minutes early. Raphael was already there. He wore a dark jacket over a rust-colored shirt and held two coffees. You're early, I said. I wanted to make sure we got a table. That sounds like planning. You've corrupted me. He handed me a cup. A little milk, no sugar. You remembered. I remember evidence. We walked through the bookstore before sitting in the cafe. Raphael selected cookbooks, architecture books, and a collection of essays about cities. I found a photographic history of Denver that included several images from our museum archive. When I showed him one, he looked at the credit line. Your name is in here. In very small print. It still counts. He bought the book. You don't need that, I said. I want it. The date, because by then I had silently accepted that it was a date, continued at a small restaurant nearby. Raphael knew two members of the staff but didn't behave like a chef evaluating another kitchen. He asked the server what they liked and ordered based on the answer. After dinner, we walked several blocks through light rain. Neither of us wanted to end the evening. At my car, Raphael put his hands in his jacket pockets. I had a good time, he said. So did I. Is that an archivist-approved statement? It can be documented. He laughed. Then the conversation stopped. The air between us held the same possibility I had felt at the Overlook. Raphael looked at me, waiting. I wanted him to kiss me. I also knew I wasn't ready to deal with what the kiss would confirm. I stepped closer and hugged him instead. His arms came around me without hesitation. The hug lasted several seconds. When I pulled back, Raphael's expression remained warm. No disappointment. No pressure. Drive safely, he said. You live 15 minutes away. Accidents can be local. I smiled. You too. Our second date happened at the museum. Raphael arrived near closing and spent nearly an hour reading every panel in the mining exhibit. When we reached the agricultural gallery, he looked up at the yellow fluorescent lights. You weren't exaggerating. I never exaggerate about lighting. This is hostile. We have a grant application pending. He stood beneath one of the fixtures. I feel like I'm being questioned. That's historically appropriate. Afterward, we ate tacos from a food truck and sat on a low wall near Civic Center Park. Our third date was dinner at Juniper on Raphael's night off. He still went into the kitchen twice. You're working, I said when he returned. I answered a question. You changed something on a plate. It was leaning. You argued with a welcome sign because it leaned. You weren't there. I can reconstruct events from evidence. By the fourth date, we had begun calling each other most evenings. Sometimes we spoke for 2 hours. Sometimes Raphael called while preparing food at home, and I listened to knives against the cutting. Bored while working through catalog records. Sometimes I called while walking from the museum to my car because I wanted to hear his voice before the day ended. The restaurant offer remained unspoken. I knew. The deadline was approaching. Raphael knew I knew. Neither of us brought it up. That silence became its own presence. One Friday evening, Raphael came to my apartment carrying groceries. I'm cooking, he said. You didn't ask. You own one pan. I own two. The second one is unusable. It's seasoned. It's damaged. He filled my kitchen with the smell of roasted peppers, garlic, and citrus. I sat at the counter while he worked. He moved differently in a kitchen, calmly, without wasted motion. His attention seemed to extend to every sound and surface at once. Do you miss it when you're not working? I asked. Cooking? The kitchen, sometimes. Mostly I miss the moment when everything comes together. He tasted the sauce and handed me the spoon. What do you think? It needs something. Raphael stared at me. I'm joking. That was cruel. He took the spoon back. His phone lit up on the counter. The screen showed a message preview. SANTA, FE Partnership Agreement, FINAL version. I looked away too late. Raphael saw my expression. I was going to tell you tonight. Tell me what? I accepted the offer. The kitchen became very quiet. When? This afternoon. I nodded. Congratulations, Jonah. It's what you wanted. I think it is. You signed a partnership agreement. You should probably be more certain. His face tightened. That's not fair. No, you're right. I stood from the stool. I need a minute. I went to the living room and stared through the window at the street. Raphael turned off the stove before following me. I didn't hide it from you, he said. You accepted this afternoon. I wanted to tell you in person. I understand. But you're acting like I lied. I'm not. You stop looking at me. I folded my arms. What do you want me to say? The truth. The truth is we've been seeing each other for 6 weeks, and you're moving to Santa Fe. In 3 months. That doesn't change the sentence. No. Raphael remained several feet away. I wasn't expecting you to reject the offer, I said. I know. I would never ask you to do that. I know that too. Then what are we doing? His expression changed. There was hurt in it now. I thought we were getting to know each other. For what? For whatever this becomes. And when you move, we decide. That sounds familiar. Raphael went still. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. I'm not your ex, he said. I didn't say you were. You compared me to him. I compared the situation. No, you decided the ending before we even talked about the middle. I looked away. Raphael took a slow breath. I accepted the restaurant because I want it, he said. I'm not going to apologize for that. You shouldn't. And I like you more than I planned to. My eyes returned to his. I haven't stopped thinking about you since the drive, he continued. I look for reasons to call you. I buy books because your name is printed in them. I've spent 6 weeks trying not to rush you because I know what temporary means to you. My throat tightened. But you're so determined not to repeat your past, he said, that you keep treating anything uncertain like it's already over. That's not what I'm doing. Then tell me what you're doing. I opened my mouth. No answer came. Raphael looked toward the kitchen. I don't need you to promise you'll move, he said. I don't need you to tell me distance won't matter. I need you to stop pretending you don't want this because wanting it might become difficult. The truth of it hurt. I do want it, I said. His eyes met mine. I want you, I continued. And I don't know how to want something without trying to protect myself from losing it. Raphael's shoulders lowered. You could let me help decide what's worth the risk. I looked at him. He stepped closer, stopping with enough distance that the choice remained visible. I think I've liked you since you threatened to abandon me at the airport, he said. I said somewhere public. Very considerate. I liked you at the diner. Before or after the stew? After. I have standards. A small smile appeared on his face. The tension in the room softened without disappearing. I'm still scared, I said. I know. You're still moving. Yes. And we don't have a solution? No. Raphael's voice was calm. But we can decide whether this is real before we decide how to manage it. I understood what he was offering. Not certainty, honesty. I want it to be real, I said. So do I. He moved one step closer, his hand lifted slightly, then stopped near my arm. Can I kiss you? The question was quiet and completely clear. Yes. Rafael placed one hand gently against my upper arm. The kiss was warm, soft, and shorter than the weeks of anticipation had made it in my imagination. When he pulled back, he searched my face. Okay, he asked. Yes. Still provisionally tolerable. Barely. He smiled. I touched the edge of his jacket, keeping him close. Can you do that again? Yes. The second kiss was just as gentle. Nothing about the future became easier, but for the first time, uncertainty didn't feel like an ending. Raphael returned to the kitchen before dinner burned. We ate at my small table with his, knee touching mine. Over the next 3 months, we became a couple in the ordinary ways that mattered. Raphael kept coffee at his apartment that I liked. I added his work schedule to my calendar without telling him and then pretended it was coincidence when I called during his breaks. He met Claire, who questioned him for 20 minutes before deciding he was acceptable. I like him, she told me privately. You called him a possible criminal. That was before I saw how he looks at you. How does he look at me? Like you're less difficult than you are. I introduced Raphael to 2 museum colleagues. He catered a small exhibit opening and refused payment, which led to our first minor argument. You worked for 2 days, I said. It was a gift. You don't give an institution free labor as a romantic gesture. I gave you free labor. The museum benefited. You were happy. That's not the point. What is the point? I opened my mouth, realized I had lost it, and helped him load equipment into his car. He introduced me to Elena. She hugged me and said, Thank you for not murdering him. You're welcome. Raphael moved to Santa Fe in August. We didn't pretend the distance would be easy. Before he left, we sat at my kitchen table with calendars, work schedules, and the same practical attention we had used at the airport. We agreed to see each other at least twice a month. We agreed that missed visits could be disappointing without becoming evidence of failure. We agreed to revisit the arrangement after 6 months. Most importantly, we agreed not to say, it's fine when it wasn't. The first month was almost exciting. I drove to Santa Fe for the restaurant's soft opening. Raphael showed me the finished space, which looked completely different from the empty building in his photograph. The exposed brick remained, but the walls had been painted a warm cream. Long wooden tables filled the center. Plants hung near the high windows. The kitchen was open enough for guests to see movement without hearing every command. Near the entrance was a framed reproduction of an old family photograph. Raphael's grandmother stood in front of a small house, holding a bowl in both hands. You identified everyone? I asked. My mother and aunt argued for 3 days. Reliable archival method. I had professional guidance. I looked at the small label beneath the photograph. It listed names, approximate date, location, and family source. You made a museum label. I know an archivist. The restaurant was called Otro Camino, another road. You named it after the drive, I asked. Partly. What's the other part? Raphael stood beside me near the entrance. Starting again without pretending you're starting from nothing. I took his hand. That's annoyingly good. I had help with the wording. Distance became less romantic by October. The drive was beautiful, but it was still 6 hours. Raphael worked evenings and weekends. I worked weekday museum hours. Sometimes I arrived in Santa Fe as he left for the restaurant. Sometimes he visited Denver and slept through half the weekend because he had worked 60 hours. We became skilled at grocery shopping together, folding laundry, and sharing quiet rooms. We also became skilled at missing each other while sitting in the same place. Our first major argument happened when Raphael canceled a Denver visit because 2 kitchen employees called in sick. I said I understood. Then I became distant for 3 days. On the 3rd night, Raphael called. You're doing it again, he said. Doing what? Punishing both of us because you're disappointed. I'm not punishing you. You answer every message with one sentence. You're busy. I'm calling now. I sat on the edge of my bed. I arranged the whole weekend, I admitted. I know. I bought tickets for the exhibit. I know. And I understand why you couldn't come. You can understand and still be upset. I hate that the restaurant always wins. The words came out more sharply than I intended. Raphael was quiet. Then he said, "Sometimes it will." I closed my eyes. "That doesn't mean it always will," he continued. "But if you need me to pretend the opening year of a restaurant won't interrupt our plans, I can't promise that." "I know. What I can promise is that I won't disappear when it does." I looked at the unused ticket confirmation on my nightstand. "I'm sorry," I said. "So am I." We stayed on the phone until neither of us felt like we had won. That was new for me. 6 months after Raphael moved, we sat in the same Santa Fe courtyard where we had shared the tasting leftovers. It was February, and heaters glowed near the tables. "We said we'd decide," Raphael said. "I remember. Do you want to keep doing this?" The question was simple. "Yes," I said. "So do I. But not like this forever." "No." He wrapped both hands around his coffee. "Would you ever consider moving?" The old version of me would have heard the question as pressure. Instead, I considered it, "My job is in Denver." "I know. My family is in Colorado." "I know that too. And I don't want my entire reason for moving to be you." "I don't want that either." He looked relieved that I had said it. A month earlier, the museum had assigned me to develop a new oral history project. I enjoyed the research but felt increasingly frustrated by how little of my work reached the public. I had begun looking at other positions without telling anyone, not because I had decided to move, because I had finally admitted that staying in Denver was also a decision. "There's a cultural history foundation here," I said. "They're hiring a collections and interpretation manager." Raphael remained very still. "I read the listing last week. Is it something you'd want?" "Yes." The answer surprised me with its clarity. "It involves archives, exhibits, and community interviews. More public work, better salary." Raphael smiled slowly. "Have you applied?" "No." "Why not?" "Because applying makes it real." "Jonah." "I know." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "Apply because you want the job," he said, "not because I'm here." "I do want it." "Then apply." I submitted the application 3 days later. The interview process lasted 6 weeks. I didn't get the job. The rejection email arrived on a Friday morning. I read it at my desk between two research requests. For an hour, I told myself it didn't matter. Then I went into the archive storage room, sat on a small step ladder, and called Raphael. "I didn't get it." "I'm sorry. They chose someone with more exhibit management experience." "That doesn't mean you weren't qualified. It means I'm not moving. It means you didn't get this job." I stared at the rows of gray archival boxes. Same result. "No." His voice became firmer. "One is a decision. The other is a rejection. I don't see the difference today. You don't have to today." Raphael didn't try to fix it. He stayed on the phone while I complained, became unreasonable, apologized, and complained again. That evening, he drove north after service. He arrived at my apartment after 2 in the morning, carrying coffee and a paper bag of pastries from a 24-hour bakery. "You drove 6 hours," I said. "You were fine." "I hate you." "No, you don't." I let him in. 2 months later, the foundation contacted me again. The person they had hired had accepted another position before starting. They wanted to know whether I remained interested. I completed another interview. This time, they offered me the job. I asked for 3 days to decide, even though I knew my answer. I spoke with my director. I spoke with Claire. I made lists comparing salaries, rent, responsibilities, and health insurance. Then I drove to Santa Fe without telling Rafael why. He met me outside Otro Camino after closing. "You look serious," he said. I accepted the job. For a moment, he didn't react. Then his face changed completely. "You did?" "I start in 6 weeks." He laughed, stepped forward, and stopped himself. "Can I hug you?" I smiled. "Yes." His arms closed around me. I held him tightly in the quiet street outside the restaurant. When we separated, Raphael kept his hands lightly on my arms. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes." "About the job?" Yes, about moving. I'm scared. That wasn't the question. I'm sure. We decided not to move in together immediately. The choice surprised everyone except us. I needed a home that belonged to my life in Santa Fe, not only to my relationship with Rafael. He needed space after a year of building a restaurant. I rented a small apartment 10 minutes from his. Within 2 months, his coffee was in my kitchen, my books were beside his bed, and both apartments contained chargers neither of us remembered buying. Living in the same city did not remove every difficulty. Raphael still worked long hours. I still retreated when I was overwhelmed. He left cabinet doors open. I organized his mail without permission. He cooked without recipes and expected me to accept phrases like, until it looks right. I measured everything. We learned. 1 year after the canceled flight, the airline sent me an automatic travel reminder. Your trip to Santa Fe is coming up. I showed Raphael. He stared at the screen. That feels threatening. I think it wants me to check in. Do not trust it. The following weekend, we drove north toward Denver to visit Claire and collect the last boxes I had stored at her apartment. Instead of taking the fastest route, Raphael pulled into the scenic overlook near Raton Pass, the same one where we had stopped during our first drive. The wind was colder than I remembered. We stood beside the railing, looking across the valley. You nearly kissed me here, I said. Raphael turned toward me. I did not. You looked at my mouth. You were talking. That explanation makes no sense. I was considering it. I knew it. You looked terrified. I was cold. You were wearing 3 layers. I smiled. The highway curved below us, carrying other travelers toward places that seemed urgent. A year earlier, I had believed the drive was an interruption, a temporary inconvenience between the life I understood and the destination I had planned. I had been wrong. The interruption had become the story. Raphael leaned against the railing. Do you ever think about what would have happened if someone else reserved the car? He asked. You would have joined a family road trip. I would have become their favorite child. Obviously. And you? I would have driven alone. You would have listened to municipal record retention podcasts. They're informative. You would have missed the diner. The sandwich was terrible. You stole my stew. 1 bite. A generous bite. I looked at him. He was no longer the stranger whose license I had photographed at an airport rental counter. He was the person who knew when my silence meant I needed space and when it meant I was waiting to be asked what was wrong. He was the person who had let me move slowly without allowing me to move backward forever. He had never promised that choosing him would be easy. He had only continued choosing me honestly. Raphael held out his hand. I took it. Ready? He asked. For what? The rest of the drive. I looked toward the car. Our bags were in the back. Coffee waited in the cup holders. The route ahead was familiar now, though neither of us knew exactly what the next year would bring. I no longer needed to know every turn before leaving. Yes, I said. Let's go.